In this video, we're going to have a look at some different ways to approach these fabulous clouds. I really love the clouds in this painting. I think that they have so much creative potential. You could stitch them hundreds of different ways. Here are some clouds that I did with a mix of split stitch and stem stitch and outline stitch, and then a bit of running stitch along the back there as well. And I also wanted to demo couching and maybe some back stitch as well, just to give you lots of different options. Before we get into stitching, I wanted to have a look at how to approach this kind of complicated shape. The clouds in this painting are really fabulous. There's a lot of movement. There are a lot of really beautiful lines and shapes and shadows, and you can really decide which bits you would like to emphasize and which shapes you see and which highlights you want to pick out. One exercise that's really helpful in encouraging you to look at the shapes is to do a blind contour drawing. So here's a blind contour drawing I did of the clouds. It's obviously not super recognizable as the painting. I mean, I've got the three trees here and then a clump of trees there, and then these big swirls here are all the clouds. And so you might be wondering, how does a blind contour drawing help you decide how to stitch these clouds? And for me, really, it's about looking at the complicated shapes and just quickly deciding how many clouds you see. And so for instance, with this one, I've got one kind of swirling cloud here. So I've got this cloud here. And then I've got these little loopy bits along the horizon. So those are my loopy bits. And then I just have one big cluster here. And so I've decided that this, in the variation that I'm doing now, this big clump is all going to be one cloud. But if you wanted to, you could divide it up. You could have three clouds layered on top of each other. It does look like this one is kind of feeding into that one. There's some really beautiful swirling lines, but you can really decide how many clouds you see and which shapes you want to emphasize. Another approach that I find really useful in dividing up a space is thinking about the tonal contrast. So here we've got some lowlights, the darker colors, and then we've got some highlights, this kind of almost yellowy gray, and then we've got the filler color. And so when I was doing my stitching on the examples here, bring up my example, I started out by filling in the lowlights first. I did this dark periwinkle blue, and then I added the gray, and then I did the highlights, and then I filled in with the beige color. And I will show you a time lapse at the end of this video of these clouds being stitched, so you can see what I mean when I say that I do the lowlights first and then highlights and then fill in, and you can see that whole process at speed. So we're going to have a look at a few different stitches. I will be stitching and filming as I go. If you want more details on the nitty-gritty of how to do these stitches, please check out the individual stitch tutorials, which I will link to below. I'm going to be using these vibrant purple hues so that you can really see what I'm doing. And I'm going to start off with stem and outline stitch in this vibrant purple color. I've done that line, and now I'm going to do a smaller version just above it. And you can see I haven't marked out a line, but if you wanted to, you could use a pencil or a water-soluble or a fading marker and just mark out the line that you want to stitch on. I wouldn't mark out the whole thing at once, just because you might change your mind on how you want to approach the stitching. I'm just doing really long stitches because I think they look like brush strokes. And I'm randomly mixing between stem, between outline, between straight stitch. And there you go, there is part of a cloud filled in quite loosely with a mix of stem and outline and some straight stitches. You could do a very similar technique with split stitch, where you start with the lowlights, then add some highlights, then fill in. and you could also do a mix between split stitch and stem stitch and outline and straight stitch and just kind of fill it in any way that feels natural. Don't even pay attention to which stitches you're doing. Just get into that flow and cover as much or as little as you like of this sky. Another stitch that I think would be really fun for the clouds is couching. And with couching, you can have a lot of fun with the colors that you're using. So I'm going to use the lighter purple as the main line, and then I'm going to use this darker purple to hold it in place. You could also use the same color to hold it in place, and that would create a more subtle effect, but I think it's kind of fun to see the holding stitches as well. So this is one of the darker areas of the cloud. I think using the really dark purple might be too much, but just having a touch of it for the holding stitch allows you to use that color without using too much of it. And I'm just kind of going to follow some of these lines. Alright, so that's an example of couching. And couching is fun because it can be used as an outline stitch, or you can also use it as a filler stitch. So you could really have a lot of fun with couching, just doing swirls that go back and forth and over top of each other, and follow the lines that you see and then double back and fill it in. You can also play with shading. Here I've used 6 strands of the kind of the pinky color secured by the white, and then I switched to 6 strands of the white secured by 2 strands of the light pink color. And they're pretty similar, but you could really play around with the shading by switching out the colors of threads that you're using and playing around with the colors that you're using for the little securing stitches as well. You could even, if you're feeling really ambitious, you could change the color of the securing stitch as you go. So let's say you wanted it to be kind of dark here and then get lighter. You could play with that and just change out these colors. That does mean having a lot of threads on the go, but that can be fun, if you're just filling in the whole sky. And yeah, just play around with it. Another stitch that could be really fun in the background would be to throw in some little fly stitches. They could also be following the lines of the piece, or you could make them look like little birds. So those are a few ideas for filling in the clouds. The sky also has some open areas where you can see the blue sky peeking through beneath, and what I did for that was I filled it in with this running stitch with 3 threads here and 6 threads in the clouds, and that created a little bit of a difference in height, so the sky looks lower and the clouds kind of pop. So that's one option with running stitch. You can definitely use it in the background for any area, but I wanted to have a play on this example here and see what it would look like to use running stitch to fill in the clouds as well, not just the background of the sky behind the clouds. So let's see what that would look like, and we'll fill in just the bottom portion of the cloud with some running stitch. So you can use running stitch to fill in the clouds as well. You could change the thread colors to add some shading. You can do long flowing lines and swirls, or just add one or two little dashes to just give that sort of hint of shading without filling it in too much. So hopefully this video gives you a few ideas on different stitches that you can use to fill in the clouds, and also gives you some tips and tricks for how to approach these complicated shapes. To finish this video, I'm going to show you a time lapse of me stitching the example, so you can see how I started with the low lights, then added some highlights, and then I filled the rest in.